Please, I just need to know, do you have any spoiled food? Anything you were going to throw away tonight? Bread or maybe some bruised fruit?"
The bell above the door chimed with a hollow metallic ring as Naomi Knowles stepped into the market, her hand locked firmly around 8-year-old Amanda's. The air inside was pressurized with the scent of roasted beans and expensive floor wax, a stark contrast to the humid, heavy air of the street outside. Naomi felt the immediate weight of judgment before she even reached the counter. Her light cardigan was pilled at the elbows, and her posture was a jagged line of defensive tension. Beside her, Amanda was a silent shadow, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her wide eyes darting between the gleaming displays of artisanal breads and the stern face of the man behind the counter. Soo-Jung Park didn't look up from the espresso machine immediately. He moved with a stiff, formal intensity, his white button-up shirt pressed to a sharp edge beneath a dark apron. When he finally turned, his gaze didn't meet Naomi's eyes. It catalogued her, the worn hem of her skirt, the fraying strap of her purse, and the sheer, raw exhaustion etched into her face. "We are preparing to close," Soo-Jung said, his voice clipped and devoid of any welcoming warmth. "The sign says you have 20 minutes, Naomi replied, her voice cracking despite her attempt at ironclad dignity. She reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing against the few coins that represented their entire world. "Please, I just need to know, do you have any spoiled food? Anything you were going to throw away tonight? Bread or maybe some bruised fruit?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Amanda's grip on Naomi's hand tightened, her small frame shrinking behind her mother's hip. Soo-Jung's lip curled, a slow, deliberate expression of elitist disdain. He leaned over the counter, his expression defiant. "This is an establishment of quality, not a charity ward. I don't keep spoiled food because I don't serve people who look like they crawled out of the gutter." He gestured vaguely at the door. "Take your daughter and go before I call security. You're bothering the real customers." Naomi felt the blood rush to her face, a burning cocktail of shame and maternal fury. She wasn't just a woman being insulted, she was a mother failing to provide, and the shopkeeper's words were like salt in an open wound. "I have money," she whispered, though they both knew it wasn't enough for anything on his shelves. "I just need to keep her alive tonight." Soo-Jung reached for the telephone on the wall, his eyes cold. Last warning, get out. Before I tell you what happened next to Naomi, don't forget to like this video, hit the subscribe button, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's dive into it. Naomi stood her ground, her body a shield for Amanda, but her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She didn't see the heavy shadow lengthening across the floor behind her. She didn't notice the sudden, chilling shift in the room's temperature as a tall, muscular man in a dark, intricately patterned suit stepped out of the periphery. Standing directly behind Naomi, his stern, focused gaze fixed on the back of Soo-Jung's head, was Ji-Won John.
The tattoos peeking from his collar served as a silent warning that the small tyrant behind the counter was about to meet a true predator. The heavy silence in the market didn't just linger, it curdled. Soo-Jung Park's hand remained frozen on the telephone receiver, his eyes widening as the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Naomi, still bracing for the arrival of security, felt a sudden, inexplicable shift in the air, a presence so massive and commanding that it felt like a physical weight pressing against her back. "Is there a problem with the lady's request?" The voice was a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated through the floorboards. Naomi turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. Standing, Inches away was a man who looked as though he had been carved from obsidian. His dark suit was tailored to a lethal edge, the intricate silk patterns on his shoulders catching the light like armor. But it was his face that stopped her heart, stern, immovable, with dark ink snaking up his neck from beneath a crisp collar. Jiwan Jiang didn't look at Naomi. His focus was entirely on the shopkeeper. Sujung's face went from a mocking flush to a ghostly, translucent pale. "Mr. Jiang," he stammered, the telephone receiver clattering back into the cradle. I didn't see you back there. I was just explaining our policy to—" "Your policy," Jiwan interrupted, his voice devoid of emotion, "seems to involve insulting a mother in front of her child." He stepped forward, moving with the predatory grace of a man who had never known fear. He placed a hand on the counter, large, steady, and marked with a faint scar across the knuckles. "I find that policy offensive." "I was mistaken," cried Sujung, his voice hitting a frantic, shrill note. He scrambled backward, nearly tripping over a display of imported teas. "Deeply mistaken. Please, The lady asked for food," Jiwan said, his gaze narrowing. It wasn't a reminder, it was a sentence. "And you told her you only serve real customers." "Well, I am a regular here, am I not?" "Yes, sir. Of course, sir." "Then today, I am her guest." Jiwan reached into his jacket and pulled out a roll of bills, tossing a stack of hundreds onto the counter without looking at them. "Fire up the kitchen. I want a feast. Not the scraps, not the spoiled bread. The best of everything you have. Fresh meat, the expensive cheeses, the fruit from the top shelf. And you will serve them at the window table."
Naomi stood frozen, her hand still clutching Amanda's. She felt a strange, dizzying mix of relief and terror. I can't pay for this," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jiwan finally looked down at her. For a fleeting second, the terrifying hardness in his eyes softened into something unreadable, something almost like recognition. "You've already paid, Naomi," he said quietly, his voice for her ears only. "With a dignity this man isn't worth." He gestured toward the best table in the shop. "Sit. Eat. My men are outside. No one will bother you again." As Sujong began to sprint toward the kitchen, his previous arrogance replaced by a desperate, sweating servility, Naomi realized the world had just shifted. She was no longer a ghost in the city. She had been seen by a king. The feast was a blur of silver trays and steam. Under the watchful, silent gaze of Jiwan Jiang, the once arrogant Sujong Park had transformed into a trembling servant, bringing out plates of honey-glazed salmon, bowls of vibrant, fresh berries, and warm loaves of brioche that smelled like a heaven Naomi had long forgotten. Amanda ate with a quiet, wide-eyed intensity, her small hands moving carefully as if the food might vanish if she reached for it too quickly. Jiwan did not join them. He stood by the window, a dark sentinel against the twilight, his presence shielding them from the curious and judgmental stares of passers-by. He didn't speak again until Naomi, her stomach finally full but her mind racing with 1,000 terrors, gathered her thin cardigan to leave. As she passed him, he reached out, not to touch her, but to offer a small, heavy piece of cardstock. It was matte black, with Jiwan Jiang embossed in a striking, cold silver script. There was no title, no company name, only a phone number that looked like a direct line to a different world. "Keep this," he said, his voice like the low roll of distant thunder. "If anyone, the shopkeeper, the landlord, or the ghosts of your past bother you again, you call that number." Naomi took the card, her fingers brushing against his cold, steady hand. The weight of the paper felt like a lead weight in her palm. "Why?" she whispered, her eyes searching his stern face for a catch, a price, a hidden hook. Men like you don't do things for free. A shadow of something, perhaps a grim irony, crossed Jiwan's face. The world is full of men who think they are kings because they can bully the hungry. I simply find it a waste of my city's air.
He turned away then, signaling to a black sedan idling at the curb. Naomi watched him disappear into the tinted darkness of the car, leaving her standing on the sidewalk, clutching Amanda's hand in one and the silver-scripted card in the other. That night, in the dim light of their cramped apartment, Naomi stared at the card. It caught the flicker of the street lamp outside like a blade. To the rest of the world, it was a lifeline, but to Naomi, a woman who had spent years fleeing one shadow only to be caught by another, it felt like a brand. She looked at Amanda, sleeping soundly for the first time in weeks, and felt a cold shiver. She had survived the shopkeeper's cruelty, but she wondered if she had just invited a much more beautiful, much more dangerous predator into her life. The card wasn't just a phone number. It was an invitation to a debt she didn't know if she could ever pay. The black sedan was a silent, unmoving shadow at the far end of Kimball Avenue, its engine cut and its lights extinguished. Inside the darkened cabin, Jiwan Jiang sat with his large hands resting loosely on the steering wheel, his gaze fixed on a third-floor window where a flickering yellow light struggled against the gloom. Through the lens of his binoculars, the world of Naomi Knowles came into sharp, painful focus. He watched her through the cracked glass of her small kitchen window. She wasn't the broken woman he had seen in the market. She was a whirlwind of quiet, exhausted motion. He saw her moving around the cramped space, plate in hand, ensuring Amanda had the best of the leftovers from the cafe, while she herself settled for a glass of water and a piece of crust. Jiwan's jaw tightened. He had spent his life surrounded by men who equated strength with violence, but watching Naomi, he realized he was witnessing a different kind of power. It was the strength of a woman who carried the weight of the world on her shoulders without letting her daughter see the burden. He saw her sit with Amanda, helping her with a school book, her tired face breaking into a genuine soft smile that transformed her entirely. His phone buzzed in the cup holder, a report from his associates. The details of her life were laid bare in a series of cold digital lines: an unpaid utility bill, a predatory landlord named Victor Petrov who had been circling her like a vulture, and a history of being failed by every man who had ever promised her safety. Jiwan looked back up at the window. He had intended this to be a simple act of fleeting charity, a whim to satisfy a sudden spark of interest. But as he watched her tuck Amanda into a makeshift bed and then slump into a chair, her head falling into her hands as the mask of strong mother finally slipped in the solitude of the night, something shifted in his chest. She was a fortress under siege, and her walls were beginning to crumble. "She doesn't know how to ask for help," Jiwan murmured into the cold silence of the car. His thumb traced the scar on his knuckle. He knew that world, the one where asking for help was a sign of weakness that invited more pain.
He didn't start the car. He stayed until the yellow light in the window finally died out, leaving the building in darkness. Naomi Knowles was a fighter, but tonight Jiwan decided she had fought enough alone. As he finally pulled away from the curb, his mind was already dismantling the obstacles in her path. He wasn't just a witness anymore. He was the storm that was about to break over anyone who dared to threaten the light in that third-floor window. The morning air in the hallway of the Kimball Avenue apartment building smelled of damp plaster and the lingering scent of wood smoke from a distant fire. Naomi walked toward her door, her heart performing its usual frantic rhythm as she checked the mail. In her hand was the dreaded yellow envelope, the third eviction notice she had expected to find tucked into the frame. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open, bracing herself for the cold legal language that would tell her she and Amanda had 48 hours to disappear. But the paper inside wasn't a notice, it was a receipt. At the top, in bold, clinical font, was the name of the management company. Below it, the balance for Unit 3C was listed as 0. In the memo line, written in the same sharp silver-inked hand she had seen on the business card, were 3 words: paid in full. Naomi leaned against the peeling wallpaper of the hallway, her breath leaving her lungs in a sharp gasp. It wasn't just the current month. The entire back rent, the late fees, and even a credit for the next 6 months had been cleared. A wave of relief washed over her, so violent it made her knees weak, but it was immediately followed by a cold, prickling dread. This wasn't a miracle from a nameless charity. This was a claim. She retreated into the apartment, locking the deadbolt with a click that sounded like a cage door closing. On the kitchen table, the matte black business card sat exactly where she had left it. The silver script seemed to glow under the dim overhead light, a constant reminder of the man who had stood in the shadows of the cafe. Jiwan Jiang hadn't just fed them, he had reached into the most private, failing corners of her life and rearranged them without her permission. "Mama, why are you crying?" asked Amanda, rubbing sleep from her eyes as she wandered into the kitchen. Naomi quickly wiped her cheeks, forcing a smile that felt brittle. "I'm not crying, baby. I think we don't have to worry about the landlord for a while." She held her daughter close, but her eyes remained fixed on that black card. To the world, Jiwan Jiang was a savior, a guardian who had banished the ghost of eviction. But Naomi knew the truth of the streets. No one paid a debt that large out of the goodness of their heart. By accepting this gift, she had become a line item in his ledger. The Mafia boss wasn't going away. He was moving in, surrounding her life with an invisible, ironclad protection that she was increasingly certain she could never escape.
The shadow on Kimball Avenue had grown longer, and Naomi realized with a sinking heart that the price of survival might be her very freedom. The following Tuesday, Naomi returned home to a sound that shouldn't have existed in her apartment: the steady, rhythmic hum of a functional appliance. When she pushed open the door, the familiar scent of damp rot and old grease had been replaced by the sharp, sterile tang of industrial cleaner and the smell of fresh sealant. She stood frozen in the doorway, her grocery bag of meager essentials heavy in her arms. In the center of her cramped kitchen sat a gleaming, professional-grade stainless steel stove. It was a masterpiece of modern engineering, its 6 burners polished to a mirror finish, a stark, almost violent contrast to the cracked linoleum and stained wallpaper. Beside it, the ancient leaking refrigerator had been replaced by a silent giant that hummed with quiet efficiency. "Mama, look!" Amanda called out from the small hallway. "The man fixed the floor. I don't have to jump over the hole anymore." Naomi dropped the bag on the counter, the sound of a single apple rolling out echoing like a heartbeat. She looked down and saw that the jagged, dangerous gap in the floorboards, the one she had been covering with a rug for months, had been seamlessly replaced with solid oak. The dripping faucet in the sink had been swapped for a sleek chrome fixture that didn't weep rust. A cold, familiar fire began to burn in Naomi's chest. It wasn't gratitude, it was the suffocating heat of a woman who felt her autonomy being stripped away, piece by piece. She marched to the kitchen table and grabbed the black business card, her thumb digging into the silver script until her nail turned white. Every repair was a link in a chain. Every new appliance was a silent sentinel, a reminder that Ji-won Chang's eyes were inside her home, measuring her needs and fulfilling them without a single word of consent. He wasn't just fixing her apartment, he was overriding her life. He was proving that she couldn't take care of herself, that her struggle was something easily solved by a man with a checkbook and a crew of silent workers. "He has no right," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. To Amanda, these were miracles. To Naomi, they were neon signs pointing to her own inadequacy. She felt the walls of the apartment closing in, no longer just a shelter, but a gilded cage built by a man who didn't even know her middle name. She looked at the new stove, its pilot light a small, steady blue flame, a new fire in her house that she didn't start and didn't know how to put out. She realized then that she couldn't hide in the shadows of Kimball Avenue anymore. The protector had become a trespasser, and she would have to face the dragon in his den before he swallowed her whole.
The black business card felt like a hot coal in Naomi's hand as she paced the length of her newly repaired kitchen. Every time her eyes landed on the gleaming stainless steel of the stove or the seamless oak of the floor, the fire in her chest flared brighter. She wasn't a project to be managed or a broken thing to be mended. She was a mother who had survived the unthinkable, and she would not let her life be annexed by a man whose name was whispered in fear throughout the city. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number embossed in silver. Each ringtone felt like a hammer blow against her resolve. "Speak," a voice finally answered. It wasn't the gravelly thunder of Ji-won Chang, but the clinical, detached tone of an associate. "I need to speak to Ji-won," Naomi said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Now!" There was a pause, a brief moment of electronic silence, and then a click. The atmosphere on the other end of the line changed instantly. The background noise of the city vanished, replaced by a heavy, expectant quiet. "Naomi," Ji-won said. He didn't ask how she got the number or why she was calling. He simply waited. "The floor, the stove, the rent. You had no right, Ji-won. You don't know me. You don't get to step into my house and decide what needs fixing." "The floor was a hazard to your daughter," Ji-won replied, his voice maddeningly calm. "The stove was a fire risk. I do not see the conflict." "The conflict is that it's my floor. It's my life." Naomi's voice rose, echoing off the clean, new surfaces of the kitchen. "I've spent years fighting to keep Amanda safe from men who think they can buy their way into our world. You think because you threw some money at a shopkeeper and a landlord that you own us? I won't be fixed, Ji-won, and I certainly won't be caged by your protection. Take it all back. I want the old stove. I want the broken floor. I want my pride back." On the other end of the line, she heard the faint sound of a lighter clicking open. "Pride is a luxury the hungry cannot afford, Naomi. But I am not buying you. I am simply removing the noise so you can breathe." "I can breathe just fine on my own," she snapped. "Stop. No more miracles. If you want to talk to me, do it like a man, not a ghost in my checkbook. But don't you dare think you can control me."
"I do not wish to control you," Ji-won said, and for the first time there was a sliver of something human in his tone, a hint of curiosity. "I wish to see what a woman like you does when she no longer has to fight for a crust of bread. If you want to give the gifts back, meet me tomorrow. Goddess and the Baker, 3 o'clock. He hung up before she could refuse. Naomi stared at the phone, her heart hammering. She had drawn a line in the sand, but as she looked at the silver script on the card, she realized she hadn't pushed the dragon away. She had just invited him to look her in the eye.
The goddess and the baker was filled with the bright, optimistic chatter of the city's elite, a world of marble counters and gold-rimmed pastries that felt a lifetime away from the cracked pavement of Kimball Avenue. Naomi sat at a small bistro table near the back, her hands folded tightly over her purse. She had dressed with care, not in anything expensive, but with a sharp, clean defiance that signaled she was not there to beg. When the heavy glass door opened, the room didn't just quiet, it shifted. Jiwan Zhang entered alone, his presence a dark, gravitational force that seemed to pull the light out of the room. He was dressed in a charcoal suit today, his expression as unreadable as a stone wall. He sat across from her without a word, his large frame making the delicate chair look like a toy. "You came," he said, his voice a low vibration that cut through the clinking of porcelain. "I came to tell you that I'm not a charity case, Jiwan," Naomi said, meeting his gaze. "I've spent my life being told what I need by people who don't care if I drown. You've replaced my stove and paid my rent, but you haven't asked me who I am. You're just another man building a cage, even if you've plated the bars in gold." Jiwan leaned back, his dark eyes tracing the lines of her face with a terrifying intensity. He reached for his espresso, but his hand stilled. "I have spent 34 years building walls, Naomi. I built them out of concrete, iron, and blood. They were designed to keep the world out, to ensure that no one could ever reach in and take what was mine." He leaned forward then, his voice dropping to a jagged whisper. "But when I saw you in that market, standing in front of your daughter while that coward mocked you, I felt something I haven't felt since I was a boy, watching my own mother starve so I could eat. I felt a crack." Naomi caught her breath. The cold, untouchable Mafia boss was gone, replaced by a man whose shadow was filled with a familiar, haunted darkness. "You make my walls crack, Naomi," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "It isn't about control. It isn't about the rent. I don't know how to be a good man. I only know how to be a powerful one.
And I realize that if I have all the power in this city and a woman like you is still struggling to find bread, then my power is meaningless." The silence between them stretched, no longer a battleground, but a bridge. Naomi looked at the man across from her and realized that his protection wasn't a debt, it was a confession. "If we do this," she said softly, "if you stave our lives, it's a partnership. No more secrets, no more miracles without a conversation. I am not your project, Jiwan." Jiwan reached across the table, his hand hovering over hers. For the first time, he waited for her to bridge the gap. "A partnership," he agreed, his voice rough. "No more cages." 6 months had passed, and the suffocating humidity of Kimball Avenue had been replaced by the crisp, clean air of the upper atmosphere. In the expansive living room of the penthouse, the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a sprawling map of lights that no longer looked like a maze of traps, but a kingdom of possibilities. The sound of joyful barking echoed off the polished floors. Amanda was no longer the silent, shrinking shadow from the market. She was a blur of energy, chasing after Bora, the white Jindo dog Jiwan had brought home for her 11th birthday. The dog's name meant purple, and the way it skidded across the rugs made Amanda's laughter ring out, a bright, clear sound that served as the heartbeat of their new life. Naomi stood by the glass, watching the sunset paint the sky in bruised oranges and deep violets. She wore a simple, elegant dress, her posture no longer a jagged line of defense, but a graceful, steady column of strength. She still worked,
Jiwan had respected her need for autonomy by helping her secure a management position at a community center, but she no longer lived in the shadow of an eviction notice. She felt the air shift before he reached her. Jiwan approached with the same predatory grace he always possessed, but his presence no longer felt a threat. He slid his arms around her waist, his large, tattooed hands resting over hers as he pulled her back against his chest. The expensive fabric of his suit was warm, and the scent of cedar and rain anchored her. "Happy?" he murmured against the crown of her head. "Terrified," admitted Naomi, though she leaned back into his strength. "Every morning I wake up expecting to find the old stove and the broken floorboards. I keep thinking this is a dream I'll be forced to pay for." "It isn't a dream." Jiwan's arms tightened, "not in a cage, but in a promise. And the debt is settled. You paid it by being the only person who dared to tell me no."
The relationship wasn't a fairy tale. They still clashed over his protective instincts and the dark ripples of his business that occasionally touched the edges of their world. But they fought as equals, two survivors who had found a way to bridge the gap between hunger and power. "Mama, Jiwan, come help me teach Bora to sit," Amanda called out, her voice filled with a carefree authority. Naomi turned in Jiwan's arms, rising on her toes to kiss the corner of his mouth. For a fleeting second, the terrifying Mafia boss disappeared, replaced by a man whose rare, genuine smile was reserved for this room alone. "Ready to play family?" she asked softly. Jiwan looked at the girl and the dog, then back at the woman who had cracked his world open. "I'm ready," he whispered, and as they walked toward the light of the living room together, the shadows of the past finally stayed behind them.